There stands in the Forum Romanum a statue with no face, whose name has been sanded down into oblivion. It stands alongside great intellectuals and politicians of past times, an unknown commemoration. Everyone tends to look at the Middle Ages when talking about brutal punishments, but there is one method that ancient Romans used that goes beyond one could do to the human body. If true immortality is being remembered forever, then damnatio memoriae is the complete opposite. And if you'd like to incur in it, here's how. First, you'll need someone who has committed a crimen majestatis, a crime against the dignity of Rome. The Gracchus brothers, nicknamed the Gracchi, were what a 2nd century BC Roman will call progressive. They represented the interests of the plebs, as their tribunes in the Senate, believing in fair distribution of the land among the laborers instead of the monopoly of Rome's rich and powerful. But when the Senate represents Rome as an entity, and you decide they shouldn't own everything, you are indeed committing a crime against its dignity. Naus Calpurnius Piso was your ideal Roman statesman, with an ambition that brought him to hold the consulship and befriend Emperor Tiberius in 7 BC and get promoted to governor of Syria after 2 decades of an illustrious career. His issue was not with the emperor but with the prince, Germanicus, whose bravado didn't sit well with Piso. Wrong enemy to choose. Emperor Domitian was great at administering stuff, and by stuff I mean the army, because hundreds of thousands of hungry dudes ready to fight at a moment's notice need a lot of administering. He was so good at administration that he did it almost all by himself, while the Senate watched and plotted. After the crime has been committed, you'll need to sentence and punish. The Gracchus brothers were one beat to death and the other cornered into taking his own life more than 10 years apart. They were that determined. The Senate decided to throw the bodies into the Tiber, confiscate both their houses and destroy them, and forbid their widows from mourning. Naus Calpurnius Piso got the blame for Germanicus' death in October of 19 AD, after the latter fell victim to a sickness that the Senate referred to as poisoning. Deemed an ideal Roman, the whole eternal city mourned the prince, except for Piso. He left Rome just in time to be a suspect of the poisoning, and got dragged back to be tried, executed, and his memory condemned to oblivion. His portraits, both public and private, across the empire, were to be destroyed. His death mask was not to be displayed anywhere, including his own funeral. The women of his family couldn't mourn Piso. Piso's oldest son was to change his family name to end the lineage. They erased his name from public inscriptions, including the statue of Germanicus. Then any additions to his private property was to be destroyed, so not even his architectural legacy remained. Domitian's death came by the hand of court officials. The city of Ephesus, with its new aqueducts, tax breaks and boundaries, to which Domitian had allowed to pay homage in the form of a cult to himself, and his beloved soldiers claimed for the late emperor to be deified. Instead, the Senate cursed his name and brought ladders into the Curia so they could take down all his commemorative shields and busts and smash them with such delight as if the blood of the emperor himself were to come out of them. The statues of Domitian were to be recarved into the shape of his successors. The cult of Domitian in Ephesus was to be disbanded, and engravings of his name in public inscriptions, records, and minted coins was to be erased completely. So, how effective was it? I am sitting here talking about all of them, so they weren't really deleted from history. The Gracchus brothers, to great frustration of the Senate, became a sort of Roman proto-saints with shrines and new statues erected to their honor at the sites where they had died, with people from every corner of the peninsula making pilgrimages. Now Calpurnius Piso's case was ironic. For every defiled image and mention of him, there survives a copy of the Senate's sanctions against his memory with complete details. In the very act of erasing Piso, they made him immortal. Domitian's temple survived after his damnatio. The thankful Ephesians removed the late emperor's figure and rededicated the place of worship to Domitian's lineage instead, the Flavians. And his statues that were taken down and stored ended up surviving better than those of emperors who were in good grace with the Senate, since they weren't subjected to the inclemency of weather by being out in public. Damnatio Memoriae, or Abolitio Nominis, as it was actually called, was in many ways a spectacle of power. The clanking of the name-erasing chisels, the hammering of the busts, and the crushing down of statues was a poignant demonstration that served more as a threat to future enemies than as the actual erasing of the person itself. Thus, the last step is to make sure you delete every bit of proof of the person's existence down to the very last detail. The biggest obstacle, though, is that the person condemned to damnatio memoriae lived and interacted with people. For every condemned person whose name becomes punishable by death, there is a family member left, a hidden supporter holding to ideas, a painting or a coin that wasn't scratched deep enough. The people's silence is never it, but a whisper. Memories and questions arise, and the statue in the Forum Romanum begins to have a face and a name again.